Okay, hello. So this is my blood pressure project. And for this project, we have our volunteer Tommy here. Tommy is right here. He's in his chair. He's been sitting here for 5 minutes to get his blood pressure stabilized. In addition, he has a straight back with his back pressed flat against his chair and his spine straight. In addition, his feet are planted on the floor and they are flat and they are not crossed. So normally we would do this in the right arm, but because Tommy had his COVID shot today in his right arm, we're going to be doing his left arm to spare him the arm pain. So basically, we have his arm where it's on the table, we have his elbow slightly flexed, and we have his palm facing upwards. This upper arm is right here, and it is at heart level. This is very important because the level of the arm, if it's not heart level, can change the blood pressure measured due to hydrostatic pressure. For example, if his upper arm was in a position lower than his heart level, then the hydrostatic pressure in his arm would be greater, and thus you get a greater measured blood pressure than the actual true blood pressure in the aorta. The same goes for if he were to hold it above his head and have his blood pressure and have his upper arm above his head, because his blood pressure would then be considered lower than the blood pressure in his heart due to the lowered hydrostatic pressure. So I will be putting this cuff onto Tommy to start our test, and I'll be rolling up his sleeve of his arm so he can do it properly like that. I'll be putting it around the midpoint of his arm. So it's important to have the right size cuff when you're doing this. So for Tommy, I measured beforehand the circumference of his upper arm. And the circumference of his upper arm was 28 centimeters, which means this regular adult size cuff will work just fine for him. Now that won't work. Now, if I were to use a smaller cuff, for instance, if I were to use a child-sized cuff on his upper arm, then it would result in the cuff being too tight and result in an overestimate of blood pressure, which we don't want. Same would go for if I used like a leg cuff, which is a cuff that would be too big or too loose on his upper arm, which would result in a blood pressure value that would be an underestimate of the true blood pressure. So I am going to position myself right here, right above the blood pressure with this sphygmomanometer at eye level so that I can properly read the values of the blood pressure without parallax. So what we're going to do first, we're going to do a pulse palpation test to determine the max inflation level for our blood pressure test. So to do a pulse palpation test, I'm going to use right here the radial artery here in Tommy's arm and find the pulse there. So when this cuff is inflated past the systolic blood pressure, which is the maximum blood pressure in the artery, what will end up happening is that this brachial artery and this radial artery will both close. And this closure of the brachial radial artery will lead to this radial artery right here. The pulse will vanish at that point. At the blood pressure where pulse vanishes is the point which approximates the max inflation rate and also will estimate our systolic blood pressure. So to do this, I'm going to rapidly first inflate this cuff to 70 to 80 milligrams of mercury, and then for every second past that, I'm going to add an additional 10 milligrams of mercury. And the point at which I can no longer palpate or feel the pulse, that will be the max inflation rate for our test, and also will be our estimate of systolic blood pressure. So, okay, so I'll do that now. Okay, so now I'm going to rapidly deflate, check for the reappearance of the pulse, which is there, so that the test is functioning properly. So this means that 126 is our max inflation rate that we're going to use during the blood pressure test. Now for the blood pressure test, I'm going to be using the stethoscope, and I'm going to be using this bell end of the stethoscope to listen in the brachial artery in the antecubital region, and I'm going to be listening for the Korotkoff sound. The Korotkoff sounds are sounds that occur right here in this brachial artery when the blood pressure cuff is at a level between the systolic and diastolic blood pressure. So basically, normally the blood in the artery will flow as laminar flow. The layers will smoothly glide over each other. They will not cross over, which will result in no sound being heard. So for example, I can check right now with the blood pressure cuff not inflated, and there's no sound that I can pick up from the brachial artery. So by contrast, when I start inflating this cuff, and this cuff is in between the systolic and diastolic blood pressure, there'll be what's known as turbulent blood flow because the blood vessel will be slightly constricted. This slight constriction will lead to layers crossing over each other and then hitting the sides of the blood vessel, which will lead to a tapping noise or a murmuring noise. So To start off, I will inflate it to the maximum inflation level, and then I will deflate by 2 milligrams of mercury per second, or 1 tick mark. The first sound that I should hear should be around the max inflation level, and should be the systolic blood pressure is the first noise that I should hear. There are other noises in between that are not either the systolic or diastolic. I have to be careful not to take as the diastolic blood pressure. In addition, there could be a gap in tap noises that occur for the systolic sound, which is known as an oscillatory gap. If an oscillatory gap occurs and I stop listening at that point, it could be interpreted as a false high diastolic blood pressure. So basically, there's the Korotkoff sound, which is the last sound, the last turbulent sound, the last Korotkoff sound that will occur will help me determine the diastolic blood pressure, which basically will occur at the very end, and we'll give the diastolic blood pressure. After that, the blood flow vessel will return to its normal size, and there will be, once again, laminar flow. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the stethoscope in my ears. I'm going to put the bell of the stethoscope right here on the cubital region, and I am going to inflate the cuff to the maximum inflation level plus 20 milligrams of mercury. I'm going to deflate it slightly. Here's some noises. They're tapping or murmuring noises. Okay, so I've waited a little bit, and I heard the last noise at 66 milligrams of mercury. So that means that our final reading, as I deflate, let me just deflate this cuff and take it off of him. We're going to get our final reading. So our final reading that we had for this test was we had his systolic, the first Korotkoff sound was heard at 126 milligrams of mercury, and the last Korotkoff sound, the diastolic Korotkoff sound, was heard at exactly 66 milligrams of mercury. So we like to say normally that healthy blood pressure would be 120 over 80 milligrams of mercury, although there is a healthy range to it. He could have 100 milligrams of mercury over 60 milligrams of mercury, all the way up to 140 over 90 milligrams of mercury and still be considered healthy. So because he had 126 milligrams of mercury over 66 milligrams of mercury, it is clear that he's within the healthy range. All right, thank you for listening.